Welcome to the From Scratch Body. Today we are doing pasta for dummies from scratch. You can make pasta at home so easily. And if you haven't got a pasta maker, you can still make it. So we're gonna do some tagliatelle today. So today I'm gonna do wholemeal flour actually, but you can do plain flour for that more traditional type of pasta. I use a bowl. I know that like the cool way is to do it on the table and you make a little well in the middle and all that stuff. But honestly, it just gets a bit too messy for me and I'm a bit like, why not just use a bowl? Maybe I'm missing something, but that's just my preference. So I have 200 grams of wholemeal flour here. You can do plain flour if you want. 1 egg. And a pinch of salt. We start mixing that together. Add a tiny bit of water. And I like adding a tiny bit of olive oil as well. You don't have to have olive oil in your pasta. You can make it completely without it. But I do love the way that that makes the pasta dough. Bit more water as and when you need it. And it's definitely good to get in with your hands at some point and start mixing it with your hands. So let's get our hands dirty. You don't want it to be too wet, so be careful not to do too much water too early. And now when it starts becoming a firm dough, that's a good moment to transfer it onto the worktop because it's a bit less messy, but now you can really move around. So for me, this is the time to transfer it onto the worktop. If you disagree, feel free to absolutely have a go at me in the comments below. If you are vegan or you can't have eggs for whatever reason, then you can have egg-free pasta, as I'm sure that you are aware, but it is super easy to make that from home as well. Water and flour, you can make pasta just from that. And there are also loads of great ways of binding a dough, because that's a great thing about egg, obviously, it's a fantastic binder. So it does make the pasta really nice and elastic and not falling apart. But it's not the only way to bind a dough. There are all these different ways. You can actually read about that on my website, thefromscratchbody.com. I talk about all sorts of different egg-free ways of binding your dough, binding your pastry. So you definitely can still have amazing pasta and other things, even if you can't have eggs. All right, we have a lovely smooth pasta dough here. We cover that in some cling film. And then it goes in the fridge for about half an hour. So out of the fridge, we have our cold pasta dough. It's very helpful that it's cold, so definitely don't skip that time in the fridge. Half an hour I recommend, but 20 minutes should be fine too, but it's just a lot easier to work with it when it's a bit cold. And also make sure that you have a lot of flour on your worktop, because that makes it a lot easier to work with as well. Now, I've got this pasta tree here, which is super handy for hanging your pasta to dry once you've made it, and then you can keep it there. If it goes completely dry, don't worry about it because it's gonna go nice when you cook it later. So for example, if you have people over, and this is a little bit time consuming, especially if you're doing it by hand and not with a pasta maker, then you can do this earlier in the day. You can just leave it out to dry because, you know, we use dry pasta all the time, right? So this is exactly that same thing. You just make your fresh pasta a little bit dry, but then it goes beautiful when you cook it in some water. So I've done a bit of pasta here already, just to show you how it hangs on the tree. And this I did with a pasta maker. So I've done a separate video on how to use a pasta maker if you're new to that. But if you haven't got one, stick with me now, because you don't absolutely need it. A pasta maker for sure saves you time, but you know, they are not cheap and not all of us have tons of space in our kitchen. So if you have a rolling pin and something to cut with that's not gonna cut your table and make little marks in the table. So if you have anything of plastic, basically, that can cut through dough, then you're good to go. So we're just gonna roll this out as thinly as possible. Turn it around, make sure that it doesn't get sticky, it doesn't stick to the surface. Try and roll it long rather than kind of square, because remember, we're trying to make tagliatelle here today. So, you know, you can just make lasagna sheets as well. You could do whatever you want and kind of skip a step. But if you want to make tagliatelle, which is what we're doing today, then just roll it as thin as you can. And as evenly as you can so that it cooks evenly, but it's not the end of the world, you know. It's kind of the charm of homemade pasta, is that it's not all completely the same because it's not made in a machine. Just gonna turn it around again, make sure that it doesn't stick. And then you just take this and you cut little strips. It takes a little bit longer, yes, especially if you're making it for a lot of people, but how easy is that, you know? If you are patient enough and you make them thin enough, this is going to be beautiful pasta. And some of them are going to be a bit longer, some of them are going to be a bit shorter. So what? It doesn't matter. It's going to be lovely, lovely tagliatelle. And I can tell you from experience that when I've made my friend tagliatelle from scratch, when I told her that, you know, I was making her a carbonara, and she came over and she saw all the pasta hanging off of that pasta tree. I don't know if it's actually called that, I just call it the pasta tree. And she was like, "You've made pasta from scratch? What?" You know, it just shows that you're kind of making a bit of extra effort, but it's super easy, super cheap as well. Just a bit of flour, egg and water, potentially a bit of oil. It is very nice and cheap, and you can make a ton of pasta dough, right? You can freeze it. You can just freeze it, and then you can take it out, let it thaw, and make more. You know, you can use it for all sorts of different things. So I really recommend trying to make your own. I'm doing this very fast and loose here. It's not the prettiest, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And then you just hang them up to dry. Even the short stubby ones, all the pasta's going to be super tasty. All up to dry. This is plenty of pasta here for 2 people, and you can just leave that for as long as you want. You can make it earlier in the day and then cook it later. All you need is to boil some water, add a pinch of salt, and then cook the pasta for maybe 4 minutes. When it's been roughly 4 minutes, then take one out, check if it's done, and that's it. That's pasta without even using a pasta maker. If you don't have one, I hope you enjoy.